Yeah, sure. So it's nice that you're holding this meeting, UGC refresher course. How many participants, sir, in total?
21, sir.
Oh, great, good.
21 participants, 8 from other states other than Tamil Nadu.
Oh, okay, nice.
Remaining, we gave 50% to outside the state, 50% to our Tamil Nadu. So, very purpose of this program Stride is to enhance the skills, particularly nowadays people, most of the life scientists are taking only the related to molecular aspects.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes,
So,
sir.
conserving organisms, conservation related issues are people are not taking up very seriously.
Yeah.
So here we want to, at least we have to take up the issue, and be really fortunate to have you, sir. So
No, sir, I'm very glad. That MK University is taking up this initiative. It's very it's the need of the time.
yes, sir. So we are having a series of programs in this tribe.
Okay.
So we proposed 5 component modules, sir. So one is going to be awareness programs related to climate change and biodiversity.
Yeah.
The other one is skill development programs like what we are conducting at present.
Yeah.
And the third one is visiting fellowships.
Yeah.
And the fourth component is going to be internship.
Okay.
We are inviting students from the PG colleges and our own students, and we are doing some fellowship to take up final year projects. So far, so good. We completed all the proposed modules for this year, sir. And this is the last one.
Yeah, great. Nice to hear.
Sir, a few formal welcome notes, sir.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
dear participants, good morning to all. So, today we have Dr. Rajah Jayapal as a resource person for this program. So, he's having, actually, if you see his biodata, he's giving more importance towards conservation. So, bird conservation is going to be one of the important area in Indian scenario. But most of the researchers, we are focusing on plants and the charismatic animals. Birds, most of the time we used to leave. But Dr. Jayapal, he is constantly working on that particular topic. And we are very fortunate to have Professor Jayapal as resource person for this session. So you can interact with him, and he is going to be very informative use of his expertise. Sir, with these few words, I welcome you on my own behalf and on behalf of Marekam University.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your kind words. So I'll share the screen, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I think you need to give me the permission to share the screen.
Karthik.
Sir, in the Google Meet platform, in the lower right corner, that present now option, sir.
Yes.
Okay. After clicking present now, you have to choose a window of your PPT. Then the screen will be shown.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sir, it is visible now.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Great. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Chandrasekhar and other participants. I'm very glad that Madurai Kamraj University is holding this first, UGC Stride refresher course on biodiversity. In general, people who are actually, practicing biodiversity ecologies or conservation, actually, most of the times, the biodiversity is often relegated to like sort of, science, soft science, not based on data, but based on opinions. So, well, in a sense that, yeah, it helps biodiversity conservation, the expert opinions, but most often actually these, we lack the data from the ground. And and our decisions with regard to biodiversity management and conservation in the field have to be backed by reliable data. But this is in fact, when Professor Chandrasekharan contacted me, I thought that I should give this talk on how we can actually even do biodiversity conservation through solid and robust data and analytical skills. So with these words, I just thought these things. This is actually, last 5 years, this has been a fantastic for Indian ornithology, the field ornithology. And so one of the most, memorable output would be the State of India's Birds Report 2020, which actually talks about, what is the current status of our birds in the wild, whether, the populations have increased or decreased. So using the citizen science initiatives. So with these things, I'll just move on to these things. So I'll give a brief introduction to the birds of the Indian subcontinent because I'm not very sure how many of the participants are, actually familiar with birds. So in world, we have almost 10,000 species of birds in the world, out of which we are very fortunate to have 1,335 species in India alone. So if you look at this map, the heat map of species, number of bird species and species richness, actually it's very clear that, the equatorial tropical regions hold the most significant part of the bird biodiversity. And like, neotropical South America, then the East Africa and the South Asia, especially the Sino-Indian Himalayas. So and for India, we have out of all 3,300 species of birds are represented by 26 orders and 113 families. So this is just an overall view of how the phylogeny, the correct classification of the Indian birds. So we have like almost 26 to 27 orders. That depends on there are some controversy over one order. So this is starting from the basal to this thing is that galliforms, the poultry like wild poultry, jungle fowl, and partridges, quails, and also ducks and geese. They form the basal to all the other bird taxa. In fact, they are the basal to all the other bird taxa. And then, of course, it comes to water birds, doves and pigeons, then cranes, bustards, then seabirds, and large-bodied water birds. Then again, you have raptors, owls. Then there's near passerines, what we call as near passerines, like kingfishers, woodpeckers, rollers, hornbills. Then, of course, the passerines, the songbirds, which is the the passeriforms order, which forms the huge proportion. Almost 60% of the world's avifauna constituted by the taxa belonging to the order passeriforms. That's the songbirds. So, but if you look at the threat category, so we have like, as you know, IUCN every year they updates annually, the threat status of the birds of the world. And for birds, just the BirdLife International, that BirdLife International that actually, assesses the birds, and then IUCN takes those data and publishes annually. So 2020 classification, if you look at these things, if you look at, there are, critically, there are 200 species, almost 200 species in the world which are critically endangered, and 460 endangered and others. So in India, we have 17 species critically endangered and 21 as endangered. So if you look at this heat map, actually it's quite interesting, even though the number of bird species richness is very high in neotropical, South America and East Africa, but it is again the India, sub-Himalayan India and Western India that actually has the highest number of, species that is threatened, globally threatened. So that is something a cause for concern actually, so that means that, there are a lot of pressures on our wild habitats and their populations. And if you just take a closer look at the threatened birds of India, you know, this is how it's classified as different threat categories. Starting from the critically endangered, we have 17 species of critically endangered in India, which also includes the three species of gyps vultures. As some of you might know, that vultures went through a drastic decline for the past decade, 2 decades. So over 99% of the populations have been wiped out because of the use of diclofenac. It's a veterinary formulation of diclofenac things. So when the vultures feed on these diclofenac ingested cattle carcass, so they just die of gout, because the vultures apparently they lack the metabolic pathway to decompose, to digest the diclofenac. So that's why now the diclofenac has been banned for the veterinary formulations, though it is considered safe for the human consumption. So now the next thing is that the endangered, and this mouse fin food from the northeastern India, which is in mangrove species. So we have 21 species of endangered, and then again as vulnerable is the 65. So these categories actually, they are categorized based on their different criteria. IUCN has very different criteria, right from the range size, population size, the rate of decline over the last 5 years, and area of occupancy and the extent of occurrence. So there's so many criteria. So based on which it is a decreasing order. The highest, the threat category is the critically endangered down to the vulnerable. So all these three categories, critically endangered, vulnerable, they were together called as threatened birds. And besides that, we also have near threatened, like black-headed ibis, about 80 species in India. So near threatened is that right now the birds are safe, but there is some undergoing threat either to their habitat or populations, and we need to take action right now. Otherwise, these birds might get into either vulnerable or endangered in near future. Then we also have three species of data deficiencies, of which we do not know much about anything about the birds, like this large-billed reed warbler. So this is how the IUCN and BirdLife International assesses the birds every year, almost for every country. So now, if this is the case, then why should we, go for what is the issue with this assessment? So, but as I said, this is a global assessment, and again, this is based on indicators, and they may not always reflect their status in the India as a country, because in India we don't have a national red listing authority or exercise. So we still we still draw information from the global assessments, which may not hold good for India. Like for example, spot-billed pelican and black-headed ibis, both the species have been classified as near threatened globally, but in India actually they are very common. They're not in any imminent danger. And again, this assessment is based on indicators, and they're not really dependent on, they're not really backed by reliable data from the field on the actual population size or status or the population trends. So we do not as yet know whether these populations are increasing or decreasing or stable. For example, which bird species show the drastic decline or increase, and whether whether the change in population trend is across the country is uniform, or is it like patchy. Some, like for example, some species might actually show increase in some parts of the country, and but some other species might show actually a decrease, because as the India is actually it's biogeographically extremely diverse, with almost 10 biogeographic zones, right from the Himalayas to the coastal and deserts. So the way forward is to have a countrywide assessment, countrywide surveys of birds and their population trends. But then it's a hugely challenging task. India is not a small country; it's a huge country, and with almost 32 lakh square kilometer, and there are 1,335 species of birds. So And there are very few organizations, in fact, if you really look at the biodiversity conservation, wildlife conservation organizations, we have SECON, Wildlife Institute of India, or, and there are very few, Bombay Natural Resources Society, Zoological Survey of India, there are very few organizations, actually, they are professionally qualified to conduct such surveys. And of course, and these organizations also, suffer from the paucity of funding support or even logistic support, because to cover the entire India you need a huge team. That's not really possible. And there's also no past data, actually. We do not know, actually, because most of our biodiversity, all, as I said, it's all based on anecdotal reports or some publications, isolated publications, or some isolated efforts. Of course, people have done good efforts in the past, but then there are very, very isolated areas and patches. So we cannot really compare the past data with the present one. And there are attempts like Asian water bird census. It's been conducted under Wetlands International for the last 3-4 decades, since 1980s onwards. But then these volunteer-based annual bird count, like Asian water bird census, they suffer from data quality issues. Like, for example, they cover only select taxa, only the water birds are covered, not the land birds. And there are a lot of, the same sites are not reported every year. Some sites will be reported, and data also restricted to certain season, because it is conducted once a year in January, only for 5 days. So most of the times the sites are not covered, or, the even, the birds taxa may not be covered for the 5 days count census methodology. And there is also no built-in filter to ensure data quality. People can actually, send in any species identification or any number and other metadata information that those information are not scrutinized by any expert committee or something like that. So whatever people send in, the data will be actually taken on face value. And of course, the sampling efforts are unknown. So we can't really make any unbiased estimation of the population size, because, volunteers, they spread out throughout the country for 5 days in the month of January. And from some places, the volunteers will count the birds for 1 hour, some places for 2 hours, some places even for 3 days consecutively. So there's a huge variations in the sampling efforts that we cannot really, have handle on that. And also the data sheet also do not, explicitly ask for the, information on sampling effort. And finally, the data are still collected over, the conventional means, not on a digital platform. So what happens is that many times people go and collect the data, but then they either forgot to send in the data to the national coordinator sitting in either in Delhi or Mumbai. So it happens that, many of the data sheets remain unsubmitted. So these are the issues related, generally related to the volunteer-based annual bird counts like water bird census. So now, then, what do we do? What did we do for the state of India's birds reportings? So in the year 2020, last year, so in February, this was released in February at the, the Convention on Migratory Species COP 11. It's happened. It's conducted in Gujarat. So it was released there, State of India's Birds 2020, Range, Trends and Conservation Status. So this is the first ever, attempt at looking at the status of India's bird populations and the current trends in the population of things. So this was a joint effort by almost, 10 organizations across the country: A3, BNHS, Foundation for Ecological Security, Nature Conservation Foundation, National Biodiversity Authority, NCBS, SECON, Wetlands International, Wildlife Institute of India, and WWF. So these 10 partner organizations under the leadership of Nature Conservation Foundation, so they came together and they looked at they looked at the eBird data that I'll just show you what was the basis for this data things, and then they analyzed the data and produced this landmark report. So eBird is the I would say it's a new buzzword in the ornithology field. Ornithology, basically it is an open access online database. So eBird is like, it was developed by Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Cornell University, US. And now every country has a eBird organizer. Like in India, we have a Bird Count India as the eBird India database, which maintains the eBird India database. Now it is an open access online database. Anybody can register, and anybody can watch birds anywhere, anytime, and record, upload the data. So it can be even just a presence absence. It can even be just a count, or it can even be even photograph. If you click a photograph of a bird, you can still upload it. And this is one of the fastest growing online community, and especially India is one of the leading country. There are right now in the world, we have, I think, some 53 crores of checklists, complete checklists have been uploaded. In India alone, we have 1 crore, more than 12 lakhs, more than 12 lakhs complete checklists have been uploaded till now. With from India alone to almost 25,000 e-birders, the bird watchers, they have uploaded the data till now. So this is a extremely useful data. And but the problem is that e-bird has been popular only, it became into being only the early 2000 actually. So people are also been encouraged to enter, even if they have a very past data, before 2000 also, like what we call as historic data. So that can also be entered as presence absence, because if they had count, then it is fine. But if they don't have the count, then just a presence absence, it is also fine. So this is how the eBird, because it's extremely important to understand the eBird data sheet, because this will help us to understand how the trends in populations were derived. So eBird, it is first data sheet will be the, say, date and effort. So the date will be asked, then the effort, whether it is traveling or stationary or historical or incidental. Incidental is that if you just see one species and you want to upload it, if it is not a complete checklist. So this is extremely important, because we taken for this report, we have taken only the complete checklist, which in the sense that you count and you saw and count each and every species that you could identify surrounding yourself. And then also it is the start time. It has a what is the duration of time spent. So ideally, eBird wants minimum 15 minutes, maximum can be the whole day actually. So we now know the actual length, duration of the count. It can range from 15 minutes to 6 hours or 7 hours. And then distance. If it is a traveling, if you're just walking through a trail and then recorded the bird populations, then you can also put the distance approximately, 0.5 kilometer or 1 kilometer. Then what is the party size and the other comments. And once you enter these things, it will start, it will give you the list of Indian species. And for example, this is for the Salim Ali Center for Ornithology, Second campus. So we already, eBird has actually kind of hotspot. Every hotspot will have a approved list of birds. So it will just show up these birds, and then I can just, all that I have to do is that click and then enter the number. And once I entered all the numbers, then I can put it as a complete checklist, and then I submit. So now eBird is also on a mobile platform. So we have now started using mobile app as eBird. It's a free to download. So this is the basis of the eBird things. Now, the beautiful part of this eBird data is that it goes through a very rigorous, data quality review. So it has two layers of data quality. One is that first layer is based on prior knowledge. So what we do is that we have divided the state or the region into different polygons. And so based on the polygons, eBird, the background data has been set in the sense that for this polygon, for this area, this is the list of species, and this is the number of species, number of individuals, that is maximum that can be recorded. So if somebody records a species which is not there, it will highlight, and then it will come to a reviewer. So we have we have more than 50 plus reviewers all across the country for different regions. And we have a reviewer account. It will come to our review queue, and then we go through it, and then whether if it is appropriate, then we approve it or these things. So first layer itself, it is so there's also a cap on the number of individuals. For example, if it is a great hornbill, and so the great hornbill, especially for like Tamil Nadu, it will be along the Western Ghats. The great hornbill will be listed. But if somebody is, birding or, watching birds in the coastal region, and of course, great hornbill is unlikely. So they cannot record the things. Even if they forcefully, if they record it, it will highlight, it will, it go into the reviewer queue. And once it is, the first layer is done, the second layer of review is that then the flagged entry will again, even sometimes, it just happens that probably, a bird might be a vagrant, and then they would have taken a picture or they would have given a good description. And if the bird watcher strongly believes that, she saw the correct species, then again it goes to the reviewer, and then the expert reviews will again approve or disapprove of it. So based on which actually we can actually look at the spatial maps, and it gives the other, interesting aspect about the eBird is the spatial output. And for different, spatial resolutions, this is actually 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer grids. And first is that house sparrow. This is the current, till yesterday, this was the record of house sparrow frequency, and this is the record of the Indian P4 things. So, and these purple squares are actually, the frequency, range of frequency. So it's like, the lightest thing will be 0 to 2%, and the darkest will be the 40 to 100%. So from this, actually, you can actually make out, you can, in fact, if you go into the eBird platform, you can zoom in, and then you can even only for the particular state, like if you want to just look at the state of Tamil Nadu, you can actually zoom in and zoom out, and then see which are the grids where the house sparrow has been recorded and what was the frequency that people have recorded. Same thing for the Indian P4 as well. So for every species, it is available on eBird platform, and the entire data and the maps, everything is completely free to download and free to, analyze for anyone. So, okay, that's the introduction to the eBird, based on which we have analyzed, we compiled the data for the State of India's Birds report and analyzed the data and found some interesting trends. So it's a brief introduction to how our methodological approach is that. So, for example, what we took is that, we took the data prior to 2002 up to 2018. And so the years were, temporal bins. We have divided the years into 10 temporal year, what we call temporal bins, basically the intervals, year intervals. So prior to 2000, 2000 to 2006, 2007 to 10, then 11, 12, 13. So that way. So that, each time interval says almost equal number of checklists or data, like almost, I think, 4,000 checklists per bin, per temporal bin. Then we gridded the entire country by 25 kilometer by 25 kilometer. That's our, analysis things. So, and we have taken only the complete checklist, in the sense that, people who have actually marked their checklist as complete, in the sense that they have seen all the birds, not just one bird or two birds. And we have taken both presence absence checklist and also the count. Either it can be, a number of individuals. So we have taken both. And the thing is that actually we did not analyze the actual count, mainly because the historical data, most of the historical data before 2000 are actually not count. It is presence absence, because those days generally people must have kept in their field notes as, what are the list of species they have seen when they visited a particular spot. So we want to make it uniform. So what we thought that we will look at only the presence absence. So we converted the count data also presence absence, and then analyze the data. Then we calculated frequency of reports. Basically, if, like, for example, if the house sparrow has been, recorded 50 times out of, 100 checklists, then its frequency of report is 0.5. So that's how it's a simple index, frequency of report. But the problem is that this frequency of report will be a biased estimate, because the sampling effort is not uniform. As I said that, every birder some birder might have just said 15 minutes, some bird watcher would have recorded it 1 hour or 2 hours, and also, some sites would have been visited more than once in a day. So there are huge variations in the sampling effort. To standardize the sampling effort and to standardize the detection probability, we calculated the detection probability. Basically, detection probability is that what is the actual probability of seeing a bird given that same sampling effort and given the duration, time duration. So we derive the standardized frequency of reports by using a GLM approach. For example, we use the generalized linear mixed model, and I'm not sure some of you might be familiar with the GLM and statistical approaches. Basically, GLM is a very powerful statistical tool that combines your multiple variables, covariates, and keeping some covariates as fixed, some covariates as random, so that we can actually calculate the actual probability, keeping some of them as random. For example, for these things, we have taken, checklist of the median effort, because, the median effort is the one which is 50% of the effort. What would be the number of, species? 50% of the effort, what would be the number of species? So we take that median effort and then calculate the average for that median effort across all the grid cells. And then also average across all the months. So that's again very important. Of course, for migrants, we took only the migrant months, like between October to May, October to April. So based on these things, we used, we keep these three variables as covariates, and we calculated the detection probability and applied the generalized linear mixed model using log function with the assumption of the binomial error. So based on which we can actually get the standardized frequency of report. So the standardized frequency of report is actually is kind of a frequency of a particular species from a particular site, after adjusting for the sampling effort or time duration or the number of observers or number of visits to that particular site. And the standardized frequency of report is converted to index of population trend. Of course, it is not the actual population size because it is based on presence absence. So we have derived the index of population trend, whether that population trend is whether it's 25% increase over the base year or 25% decrease over the base year. And again, the population trends have been divided into two things. One is the long-term trend, other is the current annual trend. The long-term trend is the data from prior to 2000 to 2018. What is the change? Almost like 20 to 25 years. So almost over the last 25 years, what is the change? That's a long-term trend. We also analyze the last 5 years, 2014 to 2018. That is the current annual trend. Because the current annual trend is actually so much better data quality, because last 5 years people have started giving a lot of bird watches have the number of bird watches have increased, and they also coverage of the sites are also quite significant compared to the past. So we looked at the data on both long term and the current annual trend. So this is the brief methodology things, and if someone is really interested, all these things were done in R. So if someone wants to know the R codes, please write to me. I can provide you the R codes. You can run the program, in R also. This is a GLM model, and for your own area and other things. And it is also available in, there's a website, stateofindiasbirds.in. So there the R codes and the GLM procedures have been explained in detail. And this is the criteria that we developed. So if the long-term trend is more than 50% of the increase, then it is called, we call it a strong increase. And if it is more than 25 to 50%, moderate increase. Minus 25 to plus 25, we say the population is more or less stable over the last 25 years. Again, the reverse is also true for the decrease, moderate decrease and strong decrease. And for the current annual trend, we kept it as 1.6, more than 1.6% is the strong increase, and 0.9% is moderate increase, and minus 0.9 to plus 1.1 is the stable populations. So this is the criteria that we have set. This is actually in line with a couple of publications in Europe and America that they also use the state of birds report. So we'll now come to the results. The overall trend is that in total, out of 1,335 species, we have reliable data on 867 species. Of course, we have removed all the nocturnal birds, because most of the bird watchers, in fact, 99% of the bird watchers, bird lists are the diurnal birds. Of course, and nocturnal bird lists are very, very few. So we have removed owls and other nocturnal birds. And this analysis was based on 10 million data sheets, as logged by 15,500 bird watchers on eBird platform. That's quite a huge huge data. And so our analysis shows that 79% of the bird species have recorded a decrease in population over the past 5 years, almost last current trend. If you look at the current trend, 79% of these species are actually showing declining trend. That's quite worrisome. And 101 species have been found to be of high conservation concern. They have extremely narrow range and very drastic decline of more than 90%, no more than 50% population in the last, for 25 years. So 101 species, these out of which 101 species, 34 species are actually, that's what's extremely important to have this as national assessment, because out of which these 34 species were assumed as safe in the global assessment. But in India, these 34 species have shown a drastic decline. And the good news is that almost 50% of the species, have over the long term. If you look at the long-term trend, about 50% of the species remain more or less same, in the sense that they're safe. And so it means that if, as I said, 79% actually last 5 years, that means that the drastic decline or habitat is happening in the last 5 years. That's the most important key aspect. And so these are some basic number of species which have shown the long-term trend and also the current annual trend. And as you see, 58 species have shown strong decrease the long-term trend, 72 in the current trend. And so 114 species stable the long term, but only 9 are stable in the current trend, last 5 years. These are some of the, out of these 101 species, I've just shown some 8 of them, which is very interesting, because out of these 8 species are actually, globally assessed as safe, but in India they're going, declining very drastically, and they're also very common birds. They're not uncommon or rare birds. So that's why, I've chosen these 8 species, like, cotton pygmy goose, resident duck, and Pacific golden plover, common green shank. Both are, migratory birds. Gull-billed tern, hot-spotted woodpecker along the western Ghats, short-toed snake eagle in the open habitat, red-necked falcon again. In fact, where you are right now, you are sitting Tiruchirappalli district. In fact, both red-necked falcon and short-toed snake eagle are quite common in the, if you just move out of Trichy. And forest wagtail again is the migrant. And if you just look at the taxa-wise, this is some data that I want to show. Like, for example, raptors. So if you look at the raptors, this is how the output is. That I think you need to understand this change in abundance index. On the x-axis, it is the abundance index. It's like 0% is the base year, and this is the increase, the positive, and this minus 25%, minus 50, minus 75%, and minus 100%. This is the change in the abundance index. And y-axis, that's an y-axis. X-axis is the time. That is the time period. Like, before 2000, then another bin, 2000 to 2006, 7 to 10, 11 to 12, then again 13, 14, 15, 16, up to 18. So year on y-axis, and change in abundance index, x-axis, and change in abundance on y-axis. So if you look at these things, forest raptors, that's the A, green color, and the shaded regions are 95% confidence interval. And this is the, as I said, the median, right? The median abundance, and this is the 95% confidence interval about the things. So forest raptors and generalist raptors, they are okay, fine. They are not much of change, even though there is the last 5 years, there's a drastic change. But in the last 3 years, they've kind of stabilized. Both the forest raptors, like your, crested hawk eagle, or generalist raptor, like your black kite. So they're kind of more or less stable. But the drastic decline that you can see is the open habitat raptors, like this red-necked falcon, or the scavenging raptors like vultures. So they have clearly shown, consistent decline over the past 25 years. So this is how to interpret the output. Same thing if you look at so in general, that means that raptors, particularly of open habitat and scavenging raptors, they have gone through a drastic decline. Now, if you look at the water birds, similar, trend analysis, resident water birds, okay, fine. And again, it's interesting, up to 2011, the population is more or less same. But last 10 years, something happened to our wetlands. something really bad happened to our wetlands, saying that the birds have started declining. And resident water birds, it's a great decline. But the most, the severely affected group is the migratory shorebirds, like this, these Devonshire. So, and gulls and terns. So, the migratory birds, shorebirds, they again show a drastic decline in the world, especially for the last 5 years. And if you look at the foraging guild wise, like, we classify birds based on their foraging guilds, like granivore, omnivores, nectarivores, insectivores, and carnivores. And interestingly, insectivores and carnivores, they have shown, a heavy drop in their numbers after 2011, where other granivores, omnivores, and frugivores, they're more or less kind of stable. And if you look at the habitat guilds, habitat generalists like Taylor bird, our red-winged bulbul or common myna, they are more or less stable, not much of a, concern. And yes, wetlands, birds of wetlands, they have shown a decline. And the most tragic part is that the birds of the grassland are scrub. So they have kind of severe things. And also, to some extent, forest birds as well. So they have shown the decline. And the endemics, if you look at the endemics versus non-endemics, so non-endemics, like, this is the long-tailed shrike. So non-endemics is actually, showing almost more or less stable thing. But then the Western Ghats endemics have shown a drastic decline drop. So this is this grey-headed bulbul. So this is something very worrisome, because Western Ghats have actually almost 25 species of birds which is endemic to the Western Ghats, and our data clearly show that Western Ghats endemics are the one which should be now given high priority, as they seem to have shown the marked decline actually consistently. But okay, now the good news is that, but the house sparrow, this has been especially it's become a media sensation, house sparrow. So right from the ministry, everyone seems to be worried, saying that house sparrows are becoming extinct or something like that. But interestingly, our data shows that house sparrow is very, very stable. It is not declined at all, except the 6 metros. So we have analyzed the data separately for the 6 metropolitan cities. Only the 6 metropolitan cities, the house sparrow populations shown a decline. But otherwise, the rural India and other suburban India, the house sparrow populations remain more or less same. That is something, which is contrary to the media perception and public perception. In fact, we have also been telling people now, saying that, it is kind of, it's good actually. It's good that people started worrying about house sparrow and other birds. But there are like other reasons, like, this is that, the reasons being ascribed to is that mobile phone, the cell phone radiations, the electromagnetic EMR radiation from the communication towers, but that's not actually, that's not backed by any strong evidence. And there are a lot of mixed results, and recent studies in Europe and all have clearly demonstrated that it is actually the decline in the insect food that and also, the nesting, maybe because nesting space, both together caused by the increasing urbanization. That's the reason for house sparrow decline, especially in the metros. And another worry thing is that Indian peafowl. So Indian peafowl, being our national bird, it's been completely protected, and it is also protected by people based on religious, grounds. So it is considered, especially by Hindus, they consider the Indian peafowl as sacred. So it kind of Indian peafowl enjoys the protected status even among the people. So we don't know whether that is the reason, or is it because of the increasing warming of the country, where the peafowl is slowly spreading. Because if you look at the population trend of peafowl, and peafowl has been enormously increasing beyond our control. In fact, this is going to be a major conservation issue in near future, because peafowl is considered as a pest, very serious pest in agricultural crops, especially the pulses and the things. And so this might lead to peafowl human conflict in near future, and it's already been happening in many parts of the agricultural fields. So the other reason is that we also strongly believe that because of the climate change, that the average temperature, it's going on high in the country, especially like, for example, in Kerala, till 2007, till 2007-10, in Kerala, the peafowl population is extremely low. And in fact, it's very rare, and only parts of Palakkad and Thrissur we had before. But if you look at today, almost the entire Kerala has been, the P4 has spread in good numbers. And that the main reason is that the mean annual temperature also increased in Kerala for over the last decade. So we also, but of course, someone has to really analyze this data more carefully, the relationship between the diurnal, the climate change and global warming and the expansion of the P4 range. So that's the story for the P4 things. So with that, actually, I'll end with a takeaway. So to just wrap up my talk, about the State of India's Birds report, the main points is that yes, 79% of India's birds show a declining trend over the past 5 years. But again, most of the decline in this happening outside the protected areas. In fact, outside the forest and outside the protected areas. That again underscores the importance of having more protected areas. And particularly of grave concern is these raptors of open habitats, migrant shorebirds of coastal wetlands, and grassland birds and scrubland birds. So these are the four groups of bird taxa which are particularly vulnerable, which are particularly show it's marked decline over the last 25 years. And yes, house sparrow population is quite stable across the country, particularly in rural landscape. And the only concern is that they're dwindling numbers in the urban metros. And this exercise, this whole report, State of India's Birds report, shows how citizen science can actually contribute to our conservation data, generating reliable data for the conservation assessments. And because such a large spatial scale like India, like 32 square lakh kilometer, it's not possible for any one organization to take this such massive study. So it's only with the help of the trained professionals and bird watchers, in a citizen science initiative, this is quite possible. So it is, I think I'll thank everyone. If you have any questions, you can ask me now. And also you can also write to me. That's my email ID, rajah.jp@gmail.com. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank a very clear picture from you about the status of Indian birds.
Yes,
it was
sir.
really interesting. Thank you for coming to this skill development program.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. We'll ask the participant to write to you if they
Yes,
have
sir.
any.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you, sir. If they have any questions, or if they can write to me.
We can ask, no issue, sir. Since you have told us you have some other program, we thought of telling them to write.
Yeah, yes, I have up to 11:30, sir. I've
Yes.
just told them say that I'll join them at 11:30. So
Yes,
if
sir.
they have any,
Okay, sir. Then we can ask questions, sir. No issue.
yes.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Yes, sir.
Myself, Ramesh from Madurai University. I observe many of the birds lays only 2 eggs, except a kitten and the bee fall like that.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir, I didn't get the question.
Sir, most of the birds lays only 2 eggs. In my observation, based on my observation, only lays 2 eggs.
Yes, sir. So actually, it's what we call as clutch size. So clutch size is the number of eggs per species per brood, which is actually quite variable. Like some species, most of the species, like bulbuls, lots of garden birds that we see, bulbuls, mynas, and all, they lay 2 eggs or 2 to 3 eggs. But some of them are indeterminate layers. Like for example, the galliforms, peafowl, and the partridge, quails, jungle fowl, they lay up to even 12 eggs. Even ducks and geese, they lay up to 12 or 15 eggs. And some of the smaller birds like tits and in other passerine songbirds, they also lay up to 5 to 6 eggs. So that depends on actually the species. Actually, it is a species trait, and so they often adjust. Of course, there are also studies which show that these birds, they adjust their clutch size based on the resource availability, the food availability, and also if it is going to be a good monsoon or not. So it's quite a complex phenomenon. But yes, yeah, clutch size is one thing that is usually biologically determined.
Thank you, sir. One more question is, there is in your title, the bird sitting in birds. Yes, very small bird, black color bird.
Yeah.
What is the name of the bird, sir?
Robin.
It's a black colored bird, sir.
Yes, yes.
Robin.
Indian
Ve-
robin.
Indian
Indian
robin.
robin, yeah. Indian robin could be. If the tail is actually cocked up, if the tail is straight, if
Right,
they have raised the tail up, yeah, it
yes.
must be Indian robins. Yeah.
This bird is recently available in Madurai, sir. Before that, there is no availability, there is no record. I think in nearby Kothakadai or Narsingam, I recently,
Yeah.
many times I observed this bird, sir.
Yeah, maybe, sir. Then maybe it is just found, the new, maybe it must have found this as a good protected site, or, people are not, harming it. So probably it must have colonized it.
Okay, thank you. Sir.
Yes.
How many species recorded in Tamil Nadu?
Sir, Tamil Nadu actually had around 480 species. Yeah.
Sir, the flamingo are
Yes, yeah.
critical endangered, sir. I see in only
Sorry?
valley. Flamingo.
Yeah, flamingos. Yeah, see, we have two species of flamingos: lesser flamingo and greater flamingo, and both the flamingos are winter visitors. In the sense that they come in October, November, and they leave by March, April, and especially we can see the flamingos along the coastal wetlands and salt pans, and along the east coast. So that's they're mainly winter visitors. They don't breed here; they breed in Gujarat actually, Run of Kutch.
Sir, the Brahmini myna are migrant.
Yes, sir. They are not, sir, actually, but Brahmini mynas, what we call as local migrants, in the sense that they are not long distance migrants, but locally they seem to show some movements, like, most probably like, 50 to 100-kilometer distance. But because for some seasons they might appear in good numbers, but some season, you don't find them. But that again depends on the availability of the food or the dispersion of the food things. But otherwise, they are mostly resident.
Okay, sir.
Sir, is there breed size 25 into 25? You say, is it minimum size or we can get less than that? If we study some.
Yes, we can in fact, we can go below 25 kilometer by 25 kilometer also. But the thing is that since what we did this analysis is for the entire countrywide. So 25 kilometer by 25 kilometer, it also we had more than, 12 lakh grids. So, even, we had to run very complex program in R to run these things. In fact, you'd be surprised, couple of analysis that we did, it took almost 8 hours for the computer to run the analysis. So that's why we made 25 kilometers as the, cutoff. Because if we go by final resolution, it is possible to have the final resolution, but we don't have a computing facility to run the analysis.
Actually,
And moreover, I think 25 kilometers is good enough for a, projection at a country level, such a huge country like India. I think 25 kilometers is good enough projection.
Actually, I am asking if we counting the in a aquatic ecosystem. So there 25 into 25 is very possible to find out.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't get it. 25?
For counting the bird in the water bodies area, like large lake or pond, there
Yeah,
this
yes, sir.
breed is impossible to count out.
No. Actually, 25 kilometers is our analysis sake. People must have counted only at the, at the very, very local scale. People must have gone to a particular lake or a river or, or a pond. They must have counted the birds. But when we analyze the data, we pooled together 25 kilometers these things. So the 25 kilometers is only for analysis purpose, not for the actual count purpose. The actual counting happens only at very, very fine scale. In fact, even a small, even, the campus, like for example, if you are seeing the MKU campus, even, people have counted birds in the Madurai Kamaraj University campus also. But when we analyze the data, we compare, we gridded the country and then we pool together the data that is falling within the 25 kilometer by 25 kilometer.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sir, right now we actually know that most of people are studying the birds, they're mostly related to the diversity.
Yeah.
So if someone want to study the ecological aspect, like what kind of the things they can do study?
Yeah, one is that yes, they do community studies, bird community studies. They look at the species diversity, species richness and other things. But ecologically, what is important is that actually, we should ask interesting questions. Like, like for example, you can take, for example, if there is two species of bulbuls, red-winged bulbul and red-whiskered bulbul, you can ask the question saying that what really because these two species of bulbuls share the same resource, they want the same, food resource, everything. In fact, their nesting requirements are same, but still you'll find most of the times together. So what really makes them, share the resources without much competition? That's a question that we need to ask, and several questions that we can raise. And for example, if for the whole nesting birds, the woodpeckers are the whole nesting birds. But then there is always a competition for the holes because tree holes are extremely precious and they are not common. So the birds compete for the tree holes, like common mynas. Often they come and evict the woodpeckers. They take over the woodpecker nests. So what would be the impact of these things like common mynas taking over the nest holes? And so this is the nesting whole nesting birds ecology. So ecology has to be like based on the questions. So we raise the right questions, ask the right questions, and then design a study, and then you can come out with the answers. And even simple things like the forest, the fire is extremely common, forest fires. So we can ask the question saying that what would be the impact of forest fire on the ground birds, like galliform, jungle fowl, partridges and quails and thrushes. So they are ground foraging birds and ground nesting birds. So what happens to them with the fire? So do they avoid that, fire prone areas? And those are the questions that we can ask actually.
Sir, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
So it's a wonderful work, sir. Like in a bigger scale, you are working and a lot of data.
Yes.
But when you are concluding something, see, like
Yes.
you mentioned, like after 2011, majority of the birds are declining.
Yeah.
So to avoid the biases, because
Yeah.
we have like huge amount of data, right? So
Yes.
to avoid the biases, what kind of methods you follow, or like what do you do before?
Yeah. So yeah, that's what. No, it's an interesting question because as I said, that last 5 years, the number of data volume of data is very high. So, but to avoid the bias of like what we have taken as like one is that the median the list length as a sampling effort, so that the checklist, if you have a median number of species, then we'll take that as the actual sampling effort, and then we adjust for the sampling effort, so that this the output will be the unbiased things. So you can actually go to the state of India's birds.in. So we have a separate section on methodology. There we have even provided the R codes and how we can avoid these biases, these things. But that's an interesting question. That's a very valid question. In fact, we looked into it. In fact, we almost worked almost for a year with the statisticians to overcome this issue.
Because see, some people may be like a completely beginner, but they might be spending a lot of time in the birding. But
Yes,
some
sir. Exactly.
super expert, or like he might be spending a very less time. I mean, if you go below the birds like reptiles or amphibians,
Yeah.
it's super common.
Yeah.
One we find a hell lot of a species, another might see one or two, or he might have seen a lot of other species, but he might have record
Yeah.
one or two, that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, please.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'm not saying that like since eBird involves 15,000 bird watchers, and all the bird watchers may not be equally good in detecting or identifying a species, and so that's how I told you. The eBird has a two ways of data quality maintenance, but I'm not saying that it is 100% error free. There will be errors. In fact, that's precisely why we did the GLM, is that because we actually assumed binomial error because it's a presence absence data. So we even modeled that binomial error. And so only if that what I didn't show you actually in detail the methodological aspect, because I thought it would be too quantitative. But what we have taken is that if that confidence interval is less than 25%, sorry, more than 25%, we did not include that in the data, in the analysis. So that's why several species of birds, we did not have projection for that. So we looked at only birds for which the estimates are within, shows 95% confidence interval is less than 25% of the median. So that's how, we arrived at this things.
Thank you.
Sir,
Yeah.
data collection, sir. Which methods are best, sir? Point count method or all or search method?
Sir, that's, that depends on the landscape which we are using. Like, for example, if we are going to work in Himalayas or in the Western Ghats, I think line transits may not work because it's extremely difficult. You cannot really, lay a straight line or almost find a trail which goes straight for almost 500 meter or 1 kilometer length. So for that, you can go in for point counts. But for a landscape like the large parts of India, the plains of India, and where I think the line transit works much better, like central India or even the plains of, Coromandel plains of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and the peninsular India, I think it's quite, line transit is much better. The reason is that a lot of birds like galliforms, the jungle fowl, partridge, quails, and thrushes, and these are actually in point counts, they're very extremely difficult to detect. But in line transit, we can detect them. So that's the main reason. With my experience, actually, I found line transit much better than point counts. But of course, the point counts we can do only if it has to be a rapid assessment, or if it has to be a landscape, the mountain landscape where line transits are not possible.
Okay, sir.
So I have a question. So
Yes,
apart from the climate change effects, do you or are there any records regarding the extinction of birds, like the associated plants, trees extinction, like co-extinction process?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, this report, State of India's Birds report, we did not do threat analysis, mainly because we don't have any data. What we depended on the bird watchers data only for the counts, but we do not have any data on. Of course, if someone wants to analyze the data with, spatially derived layers of changes in the land use, changes in the forest cover things, or changes in, industrialization or urbanization, they're most welcome to do that and then link it with these things. But as of now, we do not know the reasons. But for your question specifically, there are some species which have been studied very well in depth, and then recently, the threats have been identified. For example, if you look at the Bengal florican or lesser florican or Great Indian Bustard, the threat is that, the expansion of the agriculture, intensification of the agriculture, that seems to be the major threat. But if you look at the, the Saurus crane, the main reason is that, the poaching or, even the power line, which is collision with the power line. So this is species specific, these threats are. But if you ask me, what are the general threats to birds? Most birds is that the topmost is that habitat loss, habitat degradation. That's the topmost things. Then comes the illegal poaching, hunting, especially for water birds, it will be hunting. And of course, the illegal trade. And diseases form certain proportion, like for vultures that happen, and avian malaria also in some of the species. But that diseases form a very, small proportion of the threat.
Thank you, sir. And one more thing, there's a common notion that there is reduction in the migratory birds' arrival to India due to
Yes,
climate
yes,
change. Is it
yes.
factual or is it just like the house sparrow population?
Yeah, no, actually it is true. And it is true. And because even if you look at our State of India's birds report that I showed, one of the taxa which is affected most is the migratory shorebirds. And yes, there is consistently, drastic decline in the number of migratory birds. But for the last 25 years, but that's based on the data. But sometimes what thing is that but we need to be very cautious, because sometimes what happens is that, local birders, they visit a local wetland and then they say, oh, last year we had lots of birds, but this year the birds were very less. But that doesn't mean that, that's a decline, because it has to be on a long-term basis. It has to be on a data. And because birds are extremely, contrary to our perception, birds are very, very adaptive. And if one wetland is dry this year, they will simply move on to another wetland. And so when there's a good rain, then again they will come back. So we need to look at the long-term trend. to actually, concretely say whether the population has declined or not. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Why migratory birds not become invasive? Introduced birds become invasive.
Why migratory birds have not become invasive?
But
Yeah.
introduced birds become invasive.
Okay. That's interesting question. Actually, yeah, invasion ecology is very, it's a very different field. And so scientists are still working out, that what we call as invasion syndrome. Actually, this complex set of traits that make a particular species invasive. Like, for example, Lantrana camara or Prosopis juliflora. So Lantrana camara and Prosopis juliflora is extremely invasive. Of course, they are exotic. And they're invasive because they have a set of, syndrome. They have a set of, super adaptive characters that make them invasive. For birds, actually, actually our Indian birds are become invasive in the Western countries, not the other way around. So that's mainly because for invasion to take place, habitat degradation has to be there, and also, the invasion also, much easier when there is a less diversity. But compared to the temperate, the tropical, avifauna is very diverse. So here actually, the invasive species, it's not easy for an invasive species to colonize and successfully establish. And couple of cases happened in the past. Like, for example, there's a species called Java, Java munia or Java sparrow. That was introduced in India and Sri Lanka in 1960s. Basically, out of the cage bird trade, some of the birds escaped and they established themselves in Kolkata, parts of Machilipatnam, and parts of Sri Lanka. But after about 10 or 15 years, the population went extinct, thankfully. So it's a very complex thing. But at the same time, there are our own birds which have become invasive in Andaman and Nicobar. Because, like, for example, red-whiskered bulbul, it is now, it is colonized Nicobar Islands, which is actually, it is not there. It was an introduced species. Even though it is well within India, Andaman Nicobar Island, but it is for Nicobar Island, it is an exotic species. So now it is a threat because it is threatening a local species, Nicobar bulbuls populations. So it is a very complex question. What makes an invasive species click or does not click? That that depends on the the environmental settings that occur at that time.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
In earlier records saying that we have in Tamil Nadu like lesser this Great Indian Bustard and the lesser Florican.
Yeah.
So, is there any ongoing project on that, and what are the status that they're in that scenario?
Yeah, we have actually. In fact, Salim Ali Center on Ecology, we have right now the program going on in the Great Indian Bustard Survey and also Lesser Florican Survey, but in Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka. But in Tamil Nadu, actually, as of now, there are no such surveys in Tamil Nadu, because in Tamil Nadu, the last authentic sighting of even Great Indian Bustard was in near Coimbatore in 1973. After that, but interestingly, where you are right now, the in Tiruchirappalli, in Madurai, in fact, near Arpukotai, it's close to Madurai. So there were 7 Great Indian Bustards were sighted near Arpukotai in 1953. So that was the last sighting. So, and even if you travel from Madurai down to Tirunelveli along the R2 to Green, that highway, you can, both the sides you can see the habitat, the semi-arid open grassland habitats. That's very ideal for Great Indian Bustard and Lesser Florican. So in the past, they must have really been coming here in good numbers, but unfortunately, maybe because of the poaching or even pesticide use, we don't know actually. But their numbers just went extinct, locally kind of extinct. I mean, I can't say locally extinct because we never know. They might, 1 or 2 individuals might still be coming here every year. We do not know actually.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
So we generally do the species distribution model in the mammals.
Yeah.
It is feasible in the avian also, like, but because they do migration, like local migrants.
Sorry, sir, I could not get your question.
Sir, generally we do a migration, that species distribution model in mammal.
Yeah.
So it is feasible in also avian, like, because they do also local migration or like that.
Local migrants, yeah. Sorry. Can you use the mic, please?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
generally we do species distribution model with mammals.
Sir.
Yeah.
So you can come here and here.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, generally we do species distribution model with mammals.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, so sir, it is feasible with even also like the for monospecies or for the multi-species.
Yeah, sure. In fact, species distribution models, in fact, more than mammals, actually, people have done more for birds. In fact, the STMs, if you look at the ENFA model or environmental niche factor analysis or Maxent models, they were actually developed only with birds. Like the Maxent model, if you look at Maxent model, it was the US Fish and Wildlife Service people. They developed this Maxent model with the help of spotted owls in US. So only after that, only the mammal people actually they took on. So it's very much possible. In fact, we're all doing this, species distribution models for birds as well, especially for birds that are sparsely distributed and also habitat specialists. Because if a species is habitat generalist and it occurs throughout the country, then SDM's species distribution models won't work, because there's a lot of noise in the data. Only it will happen, it's best for using species which are habitat specialists, or if their distribution range is very, very restricted, only then it works.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions? No.
Sir, I have a question, sir. It is related
Yes,
in invasion biology only. In
Yes.
India, how many invasive species or invasive bird species have been recorded so far? And
in India, yeah. So India actually, as I said, the only one species is the Java sparrow that was introduced actually, but it is not really become invasive as such. So, and there's one more species like ring-necked pheasant that was introduced by British in the Himachal Pradesh in the around in and around Shimla, because these Europeans, when they no, in Shimla is the place where the European the babus will come and they want to stay in Shimla, the hill resorts. So they want to recreate European bird life. So they introduced the ring-necked pheasants there. But again, I think that introduced populations, that went extinct, thankfully. So as of now, we do not have any invasive species in India for birds.
nice picture only.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
So then, if no more questions, we can thank.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your kind.
Yeah, sure, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks. I was really very glad to have such interactions with your participants. Sir. Thank you very much. Good.